All right. I have back with me again tonight Lexi Mondo, the Cycle Witch. And if you haven't heard about her yet, please go back and listen to our first episode, Blood Rights, the Hidden Power of Menstrual Blood. Lexi, thank you so much for returning and talking to us tonight about our next topic, cyclical living, decolonizing medicine, gender, race, and spirituality, and it couldn't be more timely. So welcome back, Lexi. We're happy to have you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and talk about this. It's such an important topic, even more now than ever. It's always important, but
Right. Well, it's building, and the magic is here to support us. No coincidence that we've aligned to know each other and share this now. So first, to get started, can you tell us what are the cyclical arts as you coin them?
Yeah. Okay. So I would love to share this because as we were talking earlier about, like, hey, this is like this huge thing is happening right now with Supreme Court. Should we talk about that instead or not? And it's like, well, we want to make sure like we're getting education out there, like setting the foundation. So cyclical arts, to like know what they are, is so important. So the way that I frame it is, there are three main categories that I focus on for cyclical arts, which are the solar cycles, the lunar cycles, and menstrual or internal infradian cycles, right? So when we think about cycles in the universe, there's so many going on. Like there's planetary cycles, there's star cycles, there's solar cycles. So we have the year, the seasons, all of that. And then with lunar cycles, we have those cycles, which are particular to those who are on Earth. And then we have
tonight.
And tonight is the new moon. So
tonight is the new moon in Cancer.
A new moon in Cancer.
So the body, home, the divine feminine, mother, and conjunct Lilith. So Lilith is the orbital point of the moon when it's farthest from Earth, and Lilith archetypically and astrologically represents inner authority and feminine rebellion and feminine sovereignty and feminism.
So juicy. So anyway, we got Lilith in here.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but that was so important to what you're saying.
No,
carry on.
Definitely. Yeah. So we got all the Lilith energy. And so generally when I'm talking about cyclical arts, I'm referring to all of the cycles, but I in particular teach just those three because there's so many more, right? Like thank you. I usually bring in like astrologists to give us like the solar to give us the planetary and star cycles, because there's just so many we can go down. And when I talk about these arts, it's about living in tune with these cycles, right? So that is the key to our health and wellness, and like spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally, is trusting nature and the universe, that it's very well designed, and not resisting it so much. And a huge part of that is coming back to and decolonizing our relationship with nature on many layers. Our relationships to our wombs, which connects to the menstrual cycle, our connections to our bodies, which is connected to our internal infradian rhythm and cycle, our connection to the moon, which is generally more associated with our yin feminine energy cycle, which has been so demonized that whenever we talk about full moons or howling at the moon or like Friday the 13th and all of these things, like the number 13 in general, which is associated with the 13 lunar cycles every year and is a very witchy number, coming back to understanding those cycles, and coming back to the natural solar cycles. So what we're experiencing every single day and what we're experiencing seasonally, using things like traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, witchcraft, all of these sciences that are thousands and thousands of years old and have been tried and true, which we're not really allowed by modern day science to consider them real or efficient or what's the word? Reliable. Like there's this authority, which is so interesting that Lilith is the thing of authority, because right now colonization was all about taking away authority from others, and that included in science. And so cyclical arts, I know we'll dig more into like medicine and gender and the other layers of it, but that's just like an overview of like what it is. It's living in tune with those cycles. And so I could go on for hours about the tools of how to do so, but I'm gonna like stop it there, see if you have any questions about more about cyclical arts.
Well, I love the whole concept because I've been a nature girl my whole life, tree hugger, devout, plant worshiper, sun worshiper, moon worshiper. And I find that I am off if I'm not outdoors, if I'm not connecting to the environment around me, if I'm not honoring my own sleep cycle and eating cycle. For me, cycles is such a big part of my lifestyle, and nature is such a big part of my lifestyle. And I see, the effects of it on others who don't have a relationship to cycles, and those who start to integrate and incorporate cyclical living from the way I know it. But I'm so curious to hear how you know it, and also how it has historically been repressed. And how did we get removed?
Yeah.
How can we get back?
Oh my gosh. Okay. This is so, so important, because I think that we completely forget this as a species, that we have a very traumatic history that just kind of got erased, right? So patriarchy, we're told, is kind of just natural and has always kind of existed. And so, but if you even if you Google human civilization, they'll say oh, civilization started 6,000 years ago. And it's no, historically, what happened during the eugenics movement, in the 30s, is they literally declared that any societies that were not patrilineal and patriarchal were considered too savage, that they weren't actually civilizations. So in all of our history classes, at least for me in the United States and in most of Western culture, considers Rome and Greece and ancient Egypt as the founders of civilization. Anything before that, they're just I don't know. That's the official term.
Oh yeah.
That's how they felt about it. And so what actually happened is, at the rise of agriculture, there was such an increasing emphasis on the value of the sun, of solar energy. And over thousands of years, a lot of sun cults started to come about. And sun, we were always for hundreds of thousands of years, there was a lot of goddess cults, a lot of matriarchal societies, matrilineal societies, and egalitarian societies too, of really that equal balance of the sun, solar and lunar energies and praising. And then with the rise of agriculture and these rise of these sun cults, actually one took over a lot of old Europe, and eventually led to the largest quote unquote sun cult or patriarchy, which is Rome, kind of founded a lot of Western society as one of the ultimate patriarchies that was founded on the rape and pillage of entire villages, right? So, and they would have infanticide of girl babies to the extreme, that was kind of the influence. When we talk about, even historically, when we talk about Jesus coming, that's, the original reason why he was such a huge threat to the system, is because a lot of women were leaving their husbands to follow him, because he preached this message of equality crazy, right? And what we forget about the huge trauma that, with the rise of the people who actually took over Jesus's message and warped it and used it to colonize the rest of the planet, actually ended up killing millions of people, right? A mass femicide that also completely erased, and we don't talk about in history, right? Because if you were to Google like witch trials or witch burnings, you'll get something about the Salem witch trials where like 16 people were hung and all of this stuff because people thought that like, witchcraft existed because they were dumb and they thought like back in the day they didn't know. But like it's the completely wrong narrative. Like witches and witchcraft were just nature-based spirituality. So basically everything that existed before monotheism was just what we now refer today as mythology, which is also problematic historically, that we refer to monotheistic religions as religions, and pagan and nature-based religions as mythology. Anyways, it's like a whole nother realm. But these nature-based religions and people were mass murdered over 500 years in an inquisition, and people were burned at the stake. And the numbers, like there's varying numbers between 6 to 12 million people being murdered, burned alive, being buried. Like it's mass hysteria. It's like terror on womb holders because the target was women. You look at the Malleus Maleficatorum, the instructions of which was basically saying that evil was born of women, was born of the feminine and the feminine energy, and all of that feminine energy was completely demonized. And we don't talk about humanity, how we have lost, like as a whole, how we have this huge trauma and how we have lost so much knowledge and wisdom because of this mass killing, because there were entire villages where there'd only be one woman left, like this massive loss of history and access to these nature-based ways of living and cyclical living that really are dependent on us living in flow with nature, to be replaced with this colonized system that's all about controlling nature, controlling people, and dominating. I mean, you even look at Louis XIV, of how he primed and primed the gardens. That wasn't just like, oh, look at how fancy we are. It was look at how amazing it is when man can dominate nature and control nature. That is what he was showing, and that is what colonization did, and that is what took over the planet.
I'm in awe. Some of these details I don't know, and I can feel into and understand, right? Like I've felt this in myself. I was raised Jewish, so Judaism is based on the lunar cycle, and all of the holidays have very plant-based, earth-based, fire-based elements to them. So that was, very familiar for me. But yet many modern Jews don't even realize what we're doing and how it really is earth-based magic, worship, ceremony. But stepping into, modern day and even just self-guided ceremony, it's so natural. It's so part of me as a human, as a woman. And it's woven throughout Judaism, yet it's not referenced so much. At least it wasn't in my experience.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting because even in Christianity, like all of the holidays that Christians celebrate are actually pagan holidays based on nature. But in order to get people to change and in order to, convert, there we go, that's the term, to convert people, they had to say, okay, well, Ostara, that honors the goddess Esther, Eost, like that holiday is now Easter, and we're celebrating Jesus's birth, but we're still going to use the pagan symbols of bunnies and eggs to celebrate it. Like it doesn't make any sense. Easter's not anywhere in the Bible. Same thing with Yule, like winter solstice, which most all peoples around the world celebrate the return of the sun. Like literally the sun is coming back, the sun itself. And they're like, yeah, this is the son of God's birthday. It was like, yeah, it is the sun's birthday. But it's been the solar sun's birthday for hundreds of thousands of years. It's like, so it's just so interesting. How now it's considered Christmas.
Right. And it's so important for us to educate ourselves, learn the history, and then reincorporate ways that we can get back in touch with the cycles. And, part of the reason for starting this whole podcast was because of the spiritual bypassing that's so prevalent in New Age spirituality, because of the just techniques, tools, tips, gospel, if you will, that is so ungrounded in reality and so disempowering, truly. And because it's based on avoidance. And so what we've been talking about, what we're starting to talk about, is the layers of avoidance that are the root cause of disconnection and disease in the medical system, the avoidance in modern spirituality that actually keeps you from truly tuning in. And it's just spiritual bypassing and over fantasy around positive mindset and goals of trying to attain forever happiness. So how can you be avoidant when you're fully involved with the cycles of yourself and of nature and of society and of others? So I'm grateful that we're having this topic to start bringing awareness and allowing people a gateway to get back into cyclical living. So thank you for bringing up the history pieces. I'm not as educated on that aspect of it, and I'm curious to hear more. And also, just speaking to those pieces that I brought up, the colonization of gender, colonization of medicine, and now that we're kind of taking all this in, all this wisdom and knowledge you have to share with us, how can we start to integrate it and move forward?
How can we start to integrate the cyclical arts knowledge?
Yeah, well, recognizing what we haven't known, right? And getting more educated and then integrating, all right, wow, this has been robbed, this birthright of mine. How do I reclaim it? And how do I, integrate it into my daily life?
Yeah, I mean, education is huge. It's huge, right? So really getting educated about and reading from authors and educators who are people from the minority and oppressed voices. Like, for example, all of this information that I mostly have, it comes from anthropologists who are like some of the first women in the field that were allowed to, in the modern Western field, that were allowed to get their voices heard finally and over time. So I would say research, definitely listening to voices that are fighting for decolonization. Like, what does that even mean, right? Like, it is any systems that are outwardly and inwardly challenging the colonization. And so I just want to quickly clarify what I mean when I say colonization, is we're talking about the Christian supremacy, white supremacy, the patriarchy, the ableist system that colonized most all of the world. I think maybe not China, but all of the Western world. So you have North America, South America, you have even if you think about Europe, the Inquisition is before, that massive colonization really started to, it was about the same time, but when they really, really started to take over all of North America, and genocide was happening in North America, South America, in Africa, in India, in all over the world. So it's nothing is untouched, right? So I think it's our responsibility, especially if you yourself are a healer, right? If we are yoga teachers, Reiki healers, energy healers, if you're spiritual leaders of any kind, to continue, it's just irresponsible in the day and in the information age to continue without educating ourselves on how colonization has affected the world and all of our practices. Because you even take yoga, for example, and think about post-colonization, the types of attitudes and ways that they approach it, and the amount of things that they probably had to take out of their practices after colonization. And understand that a lot of this stuff was made on male bodies for male bodies. So what does that mean? And some of the things that I teach with cyclical living practices and decolonization is I teach yoga teachers how to incorporate menstrual cycle awareness into what they're teaching. That's one way to decolonize. So that's just one example, but it's our responsibility really, really to educate ourselves. What is colonization? What are the impacts on spirituality and all my practices? And what is my responsibility in decolonizing all of these things?
Beautiful and so true. So, what
Yeah.
are some ways that our listeners can start to um, bring some of these awarenesses and uh, practices into their life?
So for cyclical arts,
Hmm.
so I would say the first step would to start tracking, right? So you want to know what cycle we're in. And so for me, I have kind of like this map where I have like the three main cycles. So I would say on my map right now, I know that in my menstrual cycle, my internal infradian rhythm cycle, I know that I'm on day 12. I'm in my inner spring approaching my inner summer, right? I'm actually closer, I think, to my inner summer right now because we're on a full moon, and I tend to ovulate in closer to the new moon um, and menstruate closer to the full moon. So I know that that's where I am on the map there because I track, right? And then for the lunar cycle, I know that we're on a new moon in Cancer, which has its own winter energy. It's intuitive, like internal, like energy, which I would encourage people to educate themselves on what are the SBATs, which are the lunar rites and lunar, basically the lunar calendar, how to follow it, what the energies are of the new moon, the waning moon, the waxing moon, the full moon, like what are those energies? Um, and and then the solar, I know that we're not far away from the summer solstice, which just passed. So we're like at the beginning of the solar summer and really starting to go into that energy. And then soon up, we have monsoon season, right? So just knowing where you are and what all of that means and being aware that everything right now is artificial that tries to make us show up like a machine the same way every single day.
Hmm.
So we have artificial light to try to make sure that you're still working the same amount of hours, no matter what season it is. Meanwhile, in wintertime, like really, we should be sleeping way longer, especially for those people that are, further close to the northern or southern hemispheres where you have more nighttime. Like it's not seasonal depression, it's resistance to the fact that you need rest because you're not a machine.
Well said.
So being aware of all of those cycles and what they mean seasonally, lunar, and menstrually, like menstrually, you go through 4 seasons. You're biochemically 4 whole different people every
Mm.
single month, like biologically designed. There's certain times of the month where the hemispheres of your brain are like biologically, neurologically more connected, where your pain tolerance is lower or higher, like, and it ranges, like you become a fully different person. So to not know these, you're just doing a disservice to yourself. And so, you can find me at the Cycle Witch on Instagram. I have a ton of resources I can share with you. But there's also other ways that you can do research, but I have many recommendations, but there's many ways to look into it and really start to find your own map of where you are. Oh, I highly recommend, I might just grab this really fast. This is my favorite way to track. It's called the Cycles Journal.
Cool.
And
I haven't seen that one before. I've always
so,
just used a moon chart. I don't remember
yeah.
where I used to buy them. I used to buy them from some woman and it would come in the mail. For years, I would just have this one piece of paper with the moon for every day. And I would just
Oh,
take a marker
amazing.
and just draw on it. And I have a whole folder somewhere of years of charts of my menstrual cycle on this moon calendar. And I watch it move. It would kind of travel through it would flip flop, new moon to full moon.
Yeah, that's so amazing. That's so amazing. So yeah, those are first steps, right? Tracking.
So what's in this book you grabbed?
So this is a Cycles Journal. I'm actually featured in the 2022 and 2023 versions.
Cool.
Yeah. But so what they have is like, so on the front, they have tracking. So it could be all of your symptoms. It has the moon cycle, the solar cycle, the season, has
Love
all of
it.
your symptoms. And then of course it has like tons of resources inside. It has like monthly check-in of like, oh, there's my piece. Yay.
You.
That's a
So
New Year's
cool.
magic menstrual blood manifestation spell.
Yes.
But scattered throughout, there's like lots of different resources. But then on the individual like date pages, it has places for the weather. It has your internal season, the day you're on, your basal body temperature, physical, emotion, like it just has everything. It has the lunar cycle, the solar cycle, the zodiac, everything in there for you to be able to track that way. And then also, like I showed in the beginning with the bubbles, to really see, like, this is why, okay, let me bring this. I'm so excited because cyclical arts are your sovereign practice. It's you being able to bring the power back into your own hands of understanding yourself like a scientist. You are your best advocate. You know yourself better than anyone. You know your body better than anyone. Your body has 200,000 years worth of divine wisdom in its cells. Like, I think we spend so much time hating our bodies that we can't even stop for a minute to be like, wow, my body can make antibodies and like antibodies in like 20 minutes. It can cure, like it can start sending white blood cells to a mosquito bite within like seconds, because it's so smart, because it has been evolving way longer than my thoughts have existed. My thoughts we can tap into that and be little scientists and track, and every day be curious. Every day be curious and be like, what is my body, mind, spirit, emotions doing today? How is it affected by all of these cycles? And just getting super curious and digging in, you will find the truth. You will find the truth about your needs, about the world's needs, because as in like Ayurvedic medicine, as above, so below, right? Everything that exists in the universe is also happening within you in a microcosm. So if you can heal your relationship to that and stop resisting, and just move in flow with what is there and really understand it, you'll have so much power in your hands for your own healing, your own wellness, your own happiness. It's just incredible.
I love everything you said, and the piece around just being curious and being in observation and surrendering to what is and dropping the resistance. I think that we can apply that to every area of our lives.
Yeah.
And, as you're talking about the artificial lighting and just modern medicine, which is helpful in so many ways, but when we measure somebody's health based off of some sort of, typical range, or data based off of strangers or people who aren't even our gender or what have you, instead of getting the patient to observe and even building a relationship with the practitioner and allowing the practitioner to observe, there's just such a removal of that piece in healing. And so no wonder so many things go under the radar.
Yeah.
And so the other topics that we're talking about, just to bring it around, right? So decolonizing medicine, gender, race, and spirituality. So what do you want to pull in here to kind of integrate all those pieces of the title into this cyclical living?
Yeah, I mean, they all go hand in hand, right? So, I mean, even if we start talking about medicine, you'll see, if we start to decolonize medicine a little bit, you'll see how it vastly affects gender, race, and spirituality, right? So if we think about modern day medicine, it views, there's like multifacets, right? But it views spirit, emotion, and mental health as separate from physical. And that's not just like, oh, they happen to do that. It was very intentional, because back when Descartes wanted to study the body, wanted to start studying dead bodies, cadavers. And this is why I call it like white man science, because it's really not that old. And it's very like this I know that phrase might be triggering for some people, but to be honest, like, it's European white man science that now decides it wants to dictate what can be considered a valid type of science or not. Began with this interaction with the church, where Descartes wanted to do studies on cadavers, and the Pope was like, afterlife, that's our realm, bro. Like, you gotta get out of here. Like, you can't do that, because we got the power and telling people what there are like afterlife. And so he compromised with them, was like, let me study cadavers. I will stick only to the physical. You keep the everything else, right? So for the longest time, Western science was based in just the physical, removed, whereas before that, healing was a holistic model, right? It in everything from Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, to pagan witchcraft in old Europe, to Celtic witchcraft, to Nordic, to the Druids, to in Italy. I'm less familiar with like African witchcraft and hoodoo witchcraft, and less familiar with Chinese medicines, aside from traditional Chinese medicine. But but all of them, as far as I know, connected with spirit, with your spirituality, your emotions, your mental health as part of that healing. So that's like one layer. That's a pretty big bias to start off with as a base, right?
Huge.
So we're talking about decolonizing medicine. Like, that's a huge base. That's like a huge, huge thing, where that now we're seeing, we're like, oh, well, mental health is just important. We have to kind of like fight to get that included. And now it's slowly like coming back, and they're like, oh, like maybe meditation is helpful. Maybe praying, which is essentially what praying is meditation. It's sitting like in silence with what is, right? With intention. I'm like, oh, maybe that is important in healing. And, you know, you have holistic healers that have to fight tooth and nail to get into NIH, to get the tests around alternative, they call it alternative medicine. Anything that's not white male science is called alternative medicine and must be tested and tried by that white man medicine in order to get the green flag to even be put onto Google. As you know, there's even policies online that restrict that. Like, it's not it's against Google policies, you know, to even put advertisements about the benefits of vitamin C, because you can only have pharmaceutical grade things that are approved to be considered a treatment, right? Or considered something worth honoring. And the other half, so like one half is just like the base, it's already not a holistic. And then on the other end, you also just have the overall paradigm in Western medicine that you're treating illness. So you're not, it's not a system of wellness, it's a system of medicine, using medicine and quick fixes to treat an illness, right? Rather than having a whole system of wellness. So for me, when I got into the medical system, when you have a chronic issue, it's not even doctor's fault. They just don't know what to do. They don't have the tools because they're only taught to treat acute disease. And for that, Western medicine is really good.
It's sick care, not health care.
Exactly.
I mean, I am full on advocate for evidence-based science, research, data, numbers. Totally. Absolutely. But I think statistics are that most clinical trials are on men. And the clinical trials done on women are not, you know, during all phases of their cycle. It doesn't take into consideration all the different parts of bodies, and then intersection people as well. And so it's just so segmented and so compartmentalized. And, you know, I've tried, I think, everything I can think of, from Chinese medicine to functional medicine to, you know, allopathic medicine to herbalism. And, you know, even functional medicine is like on the other end of the spectrum. And it's like, you know, Lexi and I were talking earlier today about what's going on with Roe versus Wade, and that we have to be careful that this doesn't create a war, but that we start to integrate, that we start to educate, that we start to motivate. And, you know, in medicine, it's like either this or that. Like, there's got to be this bridge, because we need we need allopathic medicine, and we need traditional medicine. And so, you know, stepping away from this duality, like, it's still here, right? With the ancient wisdom. So, you know, I'm curious about how we bring cyclical living in, acknowledge like the amazingness that we can have lights past dark, right? Like, I don't want to go to bed at 5 every night. But we need to know all of it, and we need to be able to integrate it.
Totally, totally. I mean, like we definitely need to integrate it. And a big part of that is us standing up for what we want out of our medicine too, is to like begin going to your nutritionist, your traditional Chinese medicine provider, like all of these other holistic providers, so that they start to get recognized as equally valuable
Yes.
in this system. Because what we have happening too is like with we just it's not like there's a problem, right? It's an entire paradigm shift that needs to happen in medicine. Like you were just saying with tests, we need tests and we need data. Right now they're testing, like, I think I don't know the exact statistic, but I think it's around 80% of tests are done on male bodies. But already that is dependent on a paradigm that's extremely problematic, because you have over 175 million people on this earth that are intersex, which means they are born with a combination of different male and female biomarkers in their bodies, which means they're not fully male, not fully female. And we constantly are doing tests on, quote, men and women. So already science needs to be decolonized by putting us all in human,
Yes.
doing those tests. And then if you want differentiators, you're going to have to break it down by your biomarkers, because some people have, male chromosomes, but female genitalia, or like there's a huge combination. I won't even go down that whole line. But then the other aspect of what you're saying with being tested, when they do test on womb holding bodies, not only are you're not necessarily getting accurate tests because of the cycle, but the majority of them won't even test on womb holders in their fertile life. They test only on postmenopausal, because of the way that this type of science is structured. It's too many variables for you to have accurate tests if womb holders are on their cycle. This is where we really need to believe in art and science, because there's an art to cyclical living, right? There's not an exact science all of the time. And for all of those people that are not statistics and are caught in between, need to have a system that works for them. When we can stop saying that, okay, the doctor, like I put all of my power in the doctor's hands. And this is a big part of cyclical living too, when it comes to medicine, gender, race, spirituality. When we decide that the authority is out there and give up all of our own power of authority, including to doctors who, doctors individually, I think they're all amazing people doing great jobs. They're doing their best work. All of my doctors always had the best of intentions, but I put all of my power in their hands and was just like, oh, well, they've told me that I have XYZ, so I'm going to take all of these medications that were actually killing my liver. I'm just going to believe everything and not listen to my body that is like screaming out and asking for attention. But this, becoming your own scientist for your own body, is your responsibility, right? It's nobody else's responsibility. And when we look at medicine, about even like, if you just look at how historically ingrained this bias is, I mean, I already touched on gender, but you even look at race, like literally the founding of gynecology was founded to put Black doulas and midwives out of business. 90,000 Black doulas and midwives in the South basically owned childbirth. It was not something that required hospitalization before. It's not something that was considered medical at all. It was considered a part of life, just a part. It was a natural body process, is what they considered it. And all of these doulas and midwives had been doing this for centuries. And then you have a male white scientist that comes along, does tests on Black slave women without anesthesia, with the scientific belief that Black people do not experience pain. And basically we're torturing these women. This actually might require a trigger warning. I apologize. I should have said that before I even said what I just said earlier. Maybe we can add that after. But doing that on these women and founding this science that is about, not about overall wellness, but comes from this paradigm of, oh, well, like womb holders are other bodies. They're like using a male gaze to observe the female body medically is extremely problematic. And the entire practice of gynecology is founded from this man's research. Meanwhile, all of the cyclical living practices that those doulas and midwives carries, the herbs that they knew how to use for abortions, the herbs that they knew how to use for yoni steams to care for things like PCOS and endometriosis and painful cramps and periods, all of the herbal knowledge, all that witchcraft, all of that knowing of the cycles and how to live and flow energetically with the cycles, completely lost for like, oh, you're experiencing period pain. Oh, that's completely normal. And that's just your punishment because Eve ate an apple once. Like that is kind of what our medical system has kind of made us believe, is just that like period pain is just a normal thing when it's super common, but it's not normal. It's not normal at all. Made us believe that contraception is completely safe, has no side effects, and we can be on it for 20 years without it affecting our fertility, which is just a complete lie. Meanwhile, they're using it like 80% of people on it are not even on it for contraception, and they give it to people at age 13 to quote unquote treat the period, which is a quote unquote problem, when it actually doesn't treat anything. It just removes your cycle altogether and actually doesn't get to the root cause of the problem. So it's hugely problematic, and it's our responsibility to take that power back by knowing cyclical arts.
And I don't know if you can speak to the male listeners or the people without women.
To testosterone dominant humans or people identify as men. I was sharing with Lexi earlier that I'm still getting used to using different pronouns. I don't have a lot of practice. It's not that I don't care. So I had to pause because there are intersex humans, many of them on this planet. And so I'm still stumbling over, right, man and woman. So not people without wombs. So how could people without wombs also observe and use cyclical living to their benefit? Oh, I'm so happy you asked this question. I have so many things to say just about that alone. One, like just backtrack a little bit of what you just said, is, we totally appreciate anybody that's learning the language. And even, people like, I'm genderqueer, but I'm still trying to find the right language, right? So there's no like right answer. And like to move out of the paradigm of that binary paradigm, like we have to even create language that didn't exist before. So it's always a learning process and it's always changing. With that said, gender, as far as the binary as a system of oppression, is a very real thing that does exist. So, and people still do identify as men and women. So it's not like we can never use those terms, men and women, because they're still very real things. But people who identify as men is what I would usually say. But then also, as far as the bodies go, when it comes to internal infradian rhythms, I want to say everybody has one, whether you have a womb, whether you don't have a womb, whether you have a womb and no longer menstruate, we all are affected by infradian rhythms. And infradian rhythms is a 28-day average cycle that reflects the moon cycle. But you can have your own internal clock that might move a little bit differently, but it's really important to listen to that. And so anybody who, regardless of gender, everybody has infradian rhythms. So that's why I encourage you to track, because there's testosterone dominant humans where their testosterone will literally drop during a full moon, right? And so it's good to be aware of that. And even though in general, testosterone dominant humans will show up in their testosterone like peaks in the morning, and then will slowly go down throughout the day. cyclical living helps you to know what is going on in the daily cycle. So in Ayurvedic medicine, there is like a daily calendar between 10 and 2. There's different energies than from, 2 to 6 is a much different energy than from 6 to 10, right? And so throughout the day, knowing how to maximize your energy, like it can be as simple as that, like knowing throughout the day how to use cyclical living to maximize your energy. And testosterone dominant humans also seem to be more affected by seasonal energies from like their change between winter and summer or fall, as opposed to menstruating humans who have a much stronger infrared rhythm happening. But it can range, because you may very well be an intersex human who is menstruating. Not all people who have wombs are women. Not all people who have wombs menstruate. There's a lot of people with wombs who don't menstruate, So it's really about, like I said, being that scientist for yourself to discover what's going on, and knowing that even if let's say you are, all 16 of your biomarkers are male and you identify as a man, right? It's still super important, because even for you, your medicine, your understanding of your own gender even has been through a colonized system, has been through a white supremacist system. And so using cyclical arts to tap into who you were before colonization, it's a really beautiful way to learn to come back to the seasons, the lunar cycles, to learn that even you are not a machine. That even though you might not have an infrared rhythm as strong as a menstruating human, biologically, you still do have one, because the moon is strong enough to move the ocean. And you're 95% water. So to believe that that doesn't affect you is just scientifically inaccurate. Like it completely does. So even, male bodies who identify as men, you've been really, really hurt by colonization that has demonized the feminine energy. Because if we look at, traditional Chinese medicine, all plants and animals and living things are a balance of that yin and yang energy. And for, people who identify as men that have that feminine energy in them demonized to such an extent that it is affecting your wellness. And like I say to most people when we go into cyclical living, is like, right now we're in a stage, we're in this hyper yang energy, this toxic masculine energy, no matter what your gender is, that in order to rebalance it with that yin energy, we need to stop treating ourselves like machines and know that we have a cyclical pathway that where we need to allow for rest, because we're not machines. We're burning ourselves out nonstop because we're trying to be machines for a capitalist colonized system. And we are burning the planet. And it is until we heal that within that we can actually heal the overheating of the planet. And it has to start within. We can't just be like, stop making plastic. Meanwhile, we still hate ourselves when we're not productive every single day in the same way. Like that hyperproductivity, it has to slow down.
Absolutely. I think because you're such a blood focused practitioner, I think our blood is 90% water. I think we're like 50 to 75% water, but the earth is also 75% water. So that's why we can see the moon pull on the ocean tides, and probably why our blood, womb holders with menstruation, why the blood is so easily pulled with the moon, if we allow it, right? So, and we spoke to this in our last episode, if you're more exposed and actually seeing moonlight, you're gonna be more in sync with the moon, rather than if you're indoors all the time and don't spend a lot of time outdoors. Thank you for sharing that piece.
And thank you for calling that out too, because I was like, I wasn't exactly sure on the number on that, but
Well, everybody knows that these episodes are unedited and we often, make mistakes. We're human. So when you're speaking,
we're a lot of water.
Well, right. So public speaking, nerves, right? So things are floating around. We're trying to get it all out articulately. You're doing great. And I've been stumbling too. So hopefully people love this episode. I love it already.
I love it.
And this really is a big topic. And I think, we were sitting together before we hit record, and this is an emotionally charged time, right? Like, talk about control over bodies with what's going on politically. I mean, I think we're gonna choose to speak out about this on an Instagram Live to reach more people, to include people in the conversation. But this conversation is a conversation. It's not going to be just one episode. It's so important to bring awareness to these topics, bring resources. So I will touch base with Lexi after we stop, and I will get links to a couple different resources that they suggested. And, this is a lifelong practice. However old you are, this is maybe however old you have, how many years you haven't known about this. And so be gentle with yourself. This could be overwhelming. Some of the things I heard today from Lexi, I feel a little overwhelmed. So I've got a lot of research to do myself, because I consider myself a spiritual leader and I do not know everything Lexi had to share. So I've got my work cut out for me too.
Oh, little by little.
Yeah, little by little. And thank you so much for being so passionate about this topic and spreading it to so many people. And as is cyclical living, cyclical learning, and cyclical layers of recognizing, the more you know, the less you know. So recognizing what do we need to educate ourselves about? And this is just one piece of becoming a more informed, spiritually centered, healthy individual. So this is the tip of the iceberg, and such an important introduction. And I think you did great. So I'm so grateful for everything you shared.
Thank you. You did great. We're great together. This is why we're going to do a live together.
Yeah. And, just bringing it back to the cycle of the moon today, and what's going on in the world. Just so grateful to bring people together who care, who have something to share, and to make an impact in the way that we know how.
Yeah. In a way that's not bypassing, that's really getting into the shadows and that's why cycles are so important. It's so important because you're cycling in and out of that balance of into the dark and the uncomfortable and into the light, and it's just really about that balancing and about that authentic truth. And rather than trying to escape from reality, which I find sometimes spirituality, like you said, new age spirituality can sometimes also just be another form of escapism. Cyclical living is really grounded in what is actually going on, and rather than resisting it, really leaning into it. Thank you so much for having me on here, for giving me a chance to talk about this, because I truly believe that if we can learn to heal our relationship with the cyclical arts, that we can heal wombs, heal our relationship to the wombs, heal a lot of trauma, a lot of demonization of the feminine within us all, including ending global warming. Like, I truly believe it. And it really involves our responsibility of healing ourselves first and foremost. Not going out there and shaking our finger of how everything is going wrong out there, when we ourselves are regularly harming our own selves by resisting our own need to live cyclically. So
artfully said, and no better time to plant this seed than on a new moon in Cancer conjunct Lilith. So may this be our prayer. May this ripple out. If you know anybody who could benefit from this episode, please share it with that person. And thanks for listening, y'all. Talk to you next time.